SSC makes the top of the line of the top of the line. And when you find yourself on a new front, a dangerous new contract, or trying to look intimidating for your bodyguard position, don't just get any mech to call yourself some kind of mech warrior. Pilot a mech in which you can call yourself the next warrior. The Bella Ciao line Metalmark. SSC guarantee. Free with every model is a Smith custom leather gimbaled pilot seat to ensure comfort on long deployments. Get yours today.
Hi, hello, and welcome back to LANCER, our favorite mech tabletop RPG, where today we're back to the licenses with the good old Metalmark, SSC's first military chassis. The stealth commando, security forces, flashbang, or Zero from Borderlands if you gave him a chest plate, 2 additional arms, and then squinted a ton. But our next mech chassis, the fourth within the SSC. So first we're going down the core book, alternatively from each of the manufacturers, and alphabetically down each of those lists. This video is a covering of the entire license. The frame itself, which is listed down in the description what section that is the only thing locked to just the frame. Everything else from the license can be put on another chassis. So some of these cloaking, advanced stealth systems, particular weapons, one particular weapon in mind, all of these can be used on other chassis as well. Enough talking around it, to the Metalmark. So this is the commando mech, as brought up earlier. Not necessarily stealth, as it has a lot of offensive systems and things specifically to get up close or when you're up close in combat. And what it's mainly marketed for and sold for, it's namely for private security forces, independent mercenaries, hitmen, bounty hunters, the professional killer. The equivalent of a merc getting a very particular gun or pistol, a bounty hunter with an iconic rifle. You cash out when you want something nice, comfortable, and memorable. And I do mean comfortable, that wasn't a bit at the start. The custom Smith leather-seated gimbal pilot seat, that's real, that's in the description. So before actually getting to the mechanics and stats, the Metalmark has a lot of lore history happening, not to it, but around it. So during the latter parts of Sec Comm, there's increasing militarization into the hegemony. Instead of asking or inviting, just straight up conquering different worlds, separate colonies that split off from humanity, and any rebellion quashed quickly. Or at least violently, if not quick. And SSC saw this, and from their board saw sales. So this is where they actually begun to pivot and go directly into military. Outside of their own private forces, they weren't really a military manufacturer. Again, those private products, sure, some specialized power armor here or there, first hard suits, but again, they were a luxury line. All those private things, private stations, private ships. Now they're getting to arms manufacturing, with primarily 3 different divisions: supply, logistics, and personal defense. Or just defense for short. And then, the chassis was invented. Back at SSC, after this development, they began to entirely scrap parts of those divisions, combining them into briefly codenamed Suplogdeath, later turned into the Bella Ciao line, tasked with developing SSC's first military chassis for the Sec Comm Warrior Next program. A program of Sec Comm attempting to make the warriors of the future and giving out any grants or loans to people that can make that happen. So, new tech, these chassis, SSC's on it. However, its development doesn't happen fast enough. As the first prototype versions of the Metalmark were completed, it's the tail end of the Hercynia crisis. There's already civil war beginning to break out on Cradle, it's an entire mess. And SSC took the round 200 to 400 years of turmoil as bad for mass market appeal. At least with Union, Third Comm. This is where SSC turned to the private market. First, their own security forces, they get the prototypes first. Then private security forces and mercenary companies, and basically highest individual bidder. It's now a luxury good for killers. It was retrofitted for this new role. And so instead of being just a gunboat for the front lines, it's now, again, all the cloaking, distractions, meant to fill that role of the long-term commando or assassin. So it's got a bunch of different stealth systems, distraction systems, the equivalent of a flashbang, and cloaking. But not like the weird Eldritch Light cloaking of the Duskwing. In fact, there's mundane cloaking, the sci-fi type, tied to a few of the licenses within SSC. The Metalmark just has quite a few, and not just tied to its core frame, but also systems. But enough about the chassis itself, over to its stats. It's as compared to the Everest, the starting frame. So a lot of red, but the lower health is made up for with a bit of armor, and the high evasion, and on top of some of the other systems later on, you're going to have invisibility up a lot, so you have a lot of methods to avoid incoming damage. A lot of it left up to that invisible coin flip, even before hiding. And high speed to get around quickly, remaneuver, or get away from enemies that are coming into melee. And at baseline, you don't have many systems taking up heat. Well, you have some, if you just don't spam them. But yeah, you've seen the stats, the arrows, take your picture if you want, and we're moving on. So the Metalmark is a size 1 with 3 different weapon mounts. This is your gunboat. This is your fighter. With an Ox, main, and heavy. So we got 2 mounts and a heavy there for a super heavy later on if you want. But yeah, chassis designed for killers. And now to the first traits of this commando, Flash Cloak. You are invisible while moving, and reappear when stationary. So again, kind of like the Duskwing, really good for maneuvering between cover, that is if you're hiding. But this also means that whenever you're moving away from enemies or past enemies, you have that 50-50 coin flip of invisibility, even when they still know where you are. And then you can still do the from cover to cover like the Duskwing did earlier. The second and final trait is Carapace Adaptation. The best way to think about this one is like chameleon skin. As you duck down next to some rubble, the armor plating on your mech begins to change into that same coloration of the rubble. It's hard to pin you down from a range. So all range attacks against you when you're benefiting from this have difficulty 2 instead of just 1. However, that's ranged. So melee, they're still gonna see you. The coloration doesn't matter much. You're not actually invisible or hidden. For its core power, we have Tactical Cloak, one of the more advanced cloaking systems of SSC. And the ability it adds is honestly pretty simple. I mean, it's Tactical Cloak, you can kind of guess what it is, but Tactical Cloak is a protocol you get from said core power, and once activated, you're invisible for the rest of the scene. No caveats, no catches, no heat. You're just invisible. No matter what you do, it's not coming off, unless you end the protocol, or the scene ends. That's, again, it's not as grand as invisibility in some other systems where you're considered always hidden or unable to be detected, but being able to hide anywhere, that 50-50 coin flip remaining no matter what you do. Now that we're done with the frame, we head on to the fine goodies of the license, LL1 flash charges for 2 system points. Now, like most of the other explosives or charges, you have the grenade version and the mine version. Now, you might be guessing from the name, this is the flashbangs I referenced earlier. Not quite a regular flashbang. This isn't like an immediate flash of a flashbang to disorient you with both noise and light. This is a consistent disorientation and distraction, particularly aiming for visual sensors, and then by happenstance screwing with, the good old organic eye. It's a mix of independent flashes, explosive charges similar to a regular flashbang, bright flashing lights, independent lasers that are just firing out, more like lasers we have today, just flashing around like a light show, going into lenses, eyes, blinding and disorienting. Several bit of charges sent out to go off in sparks just adjacent from the charge. It's a crazy sporadic visual light show around it, and now blinding whoever you throw it at, so a range of 5, and lasting until the end of your next turn after you throw it, just consistently spasming. So the area the flash charges cover is a blast 3, and it affects anyone other than you, particularly because your systems are tagged into the device itself. So you actually know when certain light charges are going off, and your sensors are automatically adapting to it. The enemy or your allies aren't so lucky, as if any of them are inside of it, they can't draw a line of sight outside of the flashing. Sure, they can still roughly see in front of them, it's not blocking everything, it's not a permanent blinding to the camera, but it is screwing with sensors for anything of range. If a character enters the area, they're now affected, it's not just once the charge goes off, it's for the remaining duration of the effect. And enemies outside of it can still see everyone perfectly inside the area, their sensors are distant enough that the lights aren't immediately blinding them. So good for blinding an enemy and still being able to hit them, not like just a fog or smoke cloud. Now the flash mine is more devious, so this is actually just a burst 1. This doesn't affect as many targets. Triggers if someone moves on top of it or adjacent to it, and is an agility save. Those who fail are directly blinded for a round, only able to draw a line of sight to targets adjacent to them with other mundane sensors picking them up, until the end of their next turn, not yours, whenever the mine was triggered. This time, instead of the seemingly sporadic nature of the flash grenade, the mine itself is planted and directly targeting these to hit your sensors, able to calculate because it's actually planted down. And like most grenades, it's quick action to deploy these and limited too. Next up for the high tech of SSC is Reactive Weave for 1 system point. SSC's fine powered weave that allows for protection of delicate systems and increased mobility. Taking advantage of the fact it's already electronic and spread throughout the chassis, why not add cloaking? With Reactive Weave, whenever you brace, you immediately turn invisible until the end of your next turn, and can move half your speed in any direction. And because you're bracing, you're probably already taking a hefty amount of damage from something, so being able to go invisible and move out of the way is really nice. Kicking off LL2, we have the first weapon systems of the license, the Rail Rifle. A line 10 and 1d6 plus 1 kinetic. The main weapon, younger sibling version of the Railgun. A bit quieter, this one can actually be muffled, somehow, and a heat 1 instead of heat 2. But the Rail Rifle is just a more compact, easily accessible railgun from the Death's Head. Sure, it's half the range and you lose the AP from the Death's Head, but it's not that bad. Not the worst trade-off for the lower mount, and losing that ordnance tag especially. But going invisible, dashing around, setting up multiple targets in a line for the rail rifle. But it's not just sniping off in the distance, it's a commando, it's meant to get in close and personal. We now have the shock knife, an auxiliary melee weapon. Now it's not just a normal knife from what you can probably guess, it looks like that initially, but it is a charged energy blade. It is hot searing plasma able to appear around the edge of it. Also dealing heat 1 to you when just using it, and being a throwing knife you can chuck the thing. 5 spaces. A threat of 1 energy, and 2 burn damage. On an auxiliary melee, do you want burning plasma throwing knives? And again, burn does its initial damage and stacks, and you have an aux mount. But the shock knife itself, the shock knife description, the fine craftsmanship. Because SSC is touted for the high-end goods they sell, even when it comes to their murderous death machines that you pilot. But outside of just looking at it in the branding, finally get a look at one of their artisanal worlds, or a brief reference to one at least. So each shock knife, even when printed, is not a duplicate. It is one print. Each print unique to a single individual within SSE's Terashima Artisan Enclave. Each of these prints with its own unique artisan hash stamp. Now the thing is, if you ever lose the blade, you need to send in a written apology to said artisan to ask for another blade. The sheer dishonor of the fact that you lost their own individual craftsmanship. This wasn't something 3D printed. They designed this and then had it copied down for printing. The fact that this is a weapon that, even though yes you can print it, you have to send in a written apology letter. It's so good. Also, before heading on to LL3, the shock knife is also described as being part of the Lux iconic civilian line. It's not just part of the Bella Ciao line, it's not just part of the military. Someone is privately buying these knives, not for military use. Now I also have a theory, because it's a knife, if you just rejig the handle, maybe a person can hold it, and again, each one's individually crafted, so maybe human power swords. Kicking off LL3, we have another weapon mod, this time for melee. The good old shock wreath at 2 system points. A popular modification to go along with the shock knife. It's a collection of tiny metallic filaments that look like filigree placed on the outside of a melee weapon, either on its spear tip or its main flat edge if it's like something bludgeoning. All of these wired filaments leading down to a single power source, either within the weapon itself or held externally or attached to the mech. Once the shock wreath is activated, it begins to visually glow with this bright white light, all of that filigree lighting up, the air around it actively shimmering with heat distortion. And mechanically, you activate it as a quick action once per round when actually hitting someone with said melee weapon. Then you do the quick action and it does an additional 1d6 burn damage on a melee weapon. If the target is already burning, there's an additional bright flash of light that blinds their systems, only allowing them to draw a line of sight to adjacent spaces until the end of their next turn. So just like the flash mine from earlier, blinding their sensors, the huge immense heat, the heat distortions, the bright flashing white light of the filigree, and the already immense flames burning through everything else. And lastly, for LL3, we have active camo for 3 system points. So active camouflage gives you a new protocol that allows you to go invisible until the end of your next turn or you take damage. Now this might not seem like much, or at least not worth 3 system points, so it's the fact it's a protocol. You're saving a quick action, you're saving a full action. And this is a system, not tied to the base frame. Other chassis can pick this up. Though due to its nature of very rapidly cloaking you with a protocol instead of a full action running through systems, you end up taking 2 heat. So on the Metalmark and some other SSE chassis, it's just another invisibility system. With others, it's their only invisibility system, or at least an invisibility system they can take from another license. But that is the Metalmark, the commando of SSE, the assassin, the merc, the security, the next warrior. It's nothing too fancy. Well, it is kind of fancy. It's SSC, it's the Bella Ciao line. It's nothing too crazy or fancy. It's just an efficient killer. Invisibility, distractions, and just violent weaponry. From a railgun, a powered knife, and a shock wreath. All of it to either take you out quickly or a group of people quickly, or being able to burn you, leaving you with little options as they dash around cloaking. Or especially if they use their core power, almost never having line of sight on them. Because that's the scariest part of the Metalmark. The almost never having sight of them. Sure, they can get into combat, sure they can get in melee, they'll get into close quarters, that's almost an inevitability. They can handle themselves in a fight, for sure. The most dangerous thing about a Metalmark isn't when they're in the middle of combat, isn't when they're facing you head on. It's the fact you never see them coming. Thank you for watching the video on SSE's Commando, the Metalmark. A simpler chassis outside of the general cloaking, but hey, gets the job done. It is the Commando. It's Zero from Borderlands. A bit of cloak, a bit of assassinate, hit them in vital targets, or vital spots. Once you get into melee, leave them with the problem of burn, and then get out of there, and then fire from a distance. But it gets the job done. That job is just very lethal killers. But once again, thank you for watching the video, a thank you to my patrons, and have a nice day.